we've reserved plenty of time for questions. So if you have any questions about the school, the university, stuff that's going on, I'm more than happy to entertain those. So as to the best of my ability, most certainly. And so if you've got those, as Katie has indicated, you can put those in the chat as they occur to you. You can save them for later when we get to that point. And without any further ado, we're going to move along. So where are we in the Nicholas School right now? What's been going on? So we are at the end, basically, of the semester. All the traditional end of semester activities are taking place right now. We just finished with our professional master's symposium. So in the Nicholas School, we have 3 degree programs: undergraduate, professional, and doctoral. So right now, our professional students have just done their big presentations on their big projects that are the capstones of what they end up doing. So we just did that last week. This week, we have had our undergraduate students, the ones who are doing their theses with distinction, have done their presentations this week. So that's always an exciting time for us as well, just to see the work that our undergraduates have been doing. And then not up there, but our doctoral students are also defending at this time. So it's the time of the year when we have a lot of our doctoral students who are defending. So we've had, I don't know, a dozen or more doctoral students who have been going through their work. So it's a time of, I don't know, it's always fun to sort of see the products that our students have engaged in and to get to this sense of completion, which is what's been happening. On the research front, we are pretty much, I would say, at 80 to 90% full capacity back on our research. So we have faculty who are back in their labs, most certainly. We have faculty who are actively engaged in field research again. We have some faculty who are even doing some work internationally again. So our research enterprise is up and running. And of course, as usual, our faculty are doing some incredible work all over the place. They are being productive in realms related to climate and environmental health and oceans, and it's being picked up by us and acknowledged by the media writ large. So that's always really fulfilling for us when others find the research that's going on by our faculty and pick it up. Graduation, we are working right now to host a graduation in person. So the idea there is that we're going to have an in-person graduation ceremony for our professional and doctoral students in Cameron Indoor Stadium. We will have a ceremony for our undergraduates in Wallace Wade Stadium. We're super excited that we can do both of those in person, especially after a very long year of not being able to be together. We get to come together and have these celebrations with our students. But because attendance is somewhat limited in these venues, we are also creating virtual graduation options for our students. So family and loved ones and friends can attend and see their graduates and celebrate with them the amazing accomplishments that they have had on their journey with us over the last 2 to 4 to 6 years, depending on what degree program they are in. So that's the plan with graduation. And then slowly but surely, we are also turning our attention to fall plans, right? We can't not be thinking about what's going to happen in the fall. And so right now, we are in the process of trying to vaccinate every single student before they leave campus. It is a very ambitious goal. We think it's the right thing to do as we send students back out into the 4 corners of the world where they have come from. So as part of that, vaccinations are going to be required of every student come this fall. And that is going to allow us to be back in person or pretty close to fully in person, which is a very, very exciting proposition for us, as you can well imagine. So we are going to achieve that by continuing to engage in masking protocols. We're not exactly sure the levels of density that we will be engaging in our classrooms. We know it's going to be less dense than it is right now. More dense than it is right now. In terms of the in-person classes that we are currently holding. And then, I think we're excited about the prospects of being back, being able to be together and doing more in-person events in general. So that's kind of where we're landing, at least right now, in terms of some of the bigger issues that the school is facing, what we're dealing with, current pandemic, anticipating what the post-pandemic new normal looks like for us. And I'm happy to talk more about that or take questions on that if you have questions about that. So more for us to talk about that later. So one of the things that I have spoken about, so I'm just finishing up my 3rd year as dean. So I'll start my 4th year in July. And one of the things I talk about is vision. How do we lead with vision in this school? Tell me what your vision is. Tell me where you want to go, and let's try to figure out how we can get the resources to get there. So that's been a really consistent theme to my deanship, I think, so far. So rightly so. My faculty basically a year ago, or a little over a year ago now, said, you ask us to lead with vision, so we need to know what your vision is. Tell us what your vision is. And so, rightfully so, I asked them, they reflect that back.
Oops, Toddy, you're muted. I'm so sorry. Here we go.
Sorry about that. Thanks. So as part of that, I tried to lay out a more aspirational vision for where I wanted the Nicholas School to go. And so these are the 3 pieces basically to my vision. I want us to focus on climate change. I want us to focus on what I call narratives of possibility. And I wanted to create environmental and earth science literacy for all of our undergraduate students. So as part of that, the focus of I wanted to see us focus our collective expertise on the challenge of climate change, right? It's one of the most fundamental existential crises that we face on the planet. And the Nicholas School has a lot to say about that. And it's not, it's climate change, it's adaptation, it's resilience. So the Nicholas School has expertise that can really make a difference, move the needle, as we say, on how we understand some of these problems and their solutions. And so I have asked our faculty basically to turn our collective attention in that direction. The second pillar basically to this vision is that I want to ensure every single undergraduate student at Duke leaves this campus with some degree of environmental and earth science literacy, because we know that climate change is going to touch every single profession, whether it's medicine, whether it's finance, whether it's law, whether it's policy, whether it's engineering, and that we as the Nicholas School have an obligation or a responsibility to ensure the education of students about these issues. If they're going to be literate citizens of the world, this is something that they absolutely need to know. And then the third prong to sort of the visionary pillars that I have is the idea that when you check your phone, when you're watching the news, when you're listening to the radio, conventional and social media are just permeated absolutely by apocalyptic narratives of despair, despondency. But I would say that our responsibility as the Nicholas School is to push against those narratives of despair and to provide more solution-based options to both our students, especially our undergraduate students who are coming in with, a real general sense of despondency sometimes, and to the external audiences that we communicate with, right? So how can we address these formidable challenges that we face? So our formula for that is 20% of the time, let's talk about the problem. And then the other 80% of the time, when we're in the classroom, we're in front of the media, when we're in front of any other kind of external audience, let's talk about solutions, right? Let's give people a chance to think in a more hopeful way. All right. So so those are the 3 pillars to the vision. How have we done over the last year in terms of fulfilling this? So we have 3 undergraduate majors, 2 of which are new, or new-ish, I should say. So Earth and Climate Science is an undergraduate major previously known as Earth and Ocean Sciences. Now it's called Earth and Climate Sciences. To really explicitly acknowledge the intention for the Nicholas School to focus on climate. And so I'm very, very excited about this development. It was just approved by Trinity this spring, so really brand new. And the same thing, a brand new major in marine science and conservation to really signal the strengths that Duke has in the marine and oceans area. So we've got a way for students who want to major now in marine science and conservation to do so. So those are 2 new majors. We will be doing a really big push on those over the summer and into the fall, basically, so students know where to find those majors and how to sign up into them. So that's very, very exciting for us. We also have hired some incredible new faculty over the last year. Yes, we've had a pandemic. We were very fortunate to receive a very generous gift of $20 million from one of our donors a year and a half ago, basically. And with that very generous gift, we've been able to hire some faculty. And they fit clearly within the larger vision that we've articulated as a school. So we have 4 new faculty to celebrate who are helping us make connections on climate and to help us promote our undergraduate curriculum. So Brian McAdoo, the gentleman there on the far left, is an expert in disaster risks who is highly regarded for his innovative and integrated approach to research and teaching. So we're really lucky to have him coming on board. Shineng Hu is a climate modeler who focuses on ocean and atmospheric interactions. Again, very excited to have him. He will start with us here in May. So he's starting right away, and Dr. McAdoo will start with us in July. Both Dr. McAdoo and Dr. Hu will be joining the Division of Earth and Ocean Sciences, or Earth and Climate Sciences. They have also changed their name to match the undergraduate degree. I need to change that in my slides. Nishad Jayansundara is an ecotoxicologist who focuses on water contamination and human health. He is joining our Environmental Science and Policy Division, which is super exciting. And then finally, Dr. Ryan Emanuel is a hydrologist with a focus on environmental justice, especially in Indigenous communities. So we're really fortunate to have Dr. Emanuel and Dr. Jayansundara be joining our Environmental Science and Policy faculty this fall. So again, we're really fortunate with the directions that we're headed, and everything is sort of strategically aligned in terms of how we move the entire school forward. The other piece that I would like to share with you is that through a very generous gift, we were able to establish something called the Dean's Research Venture Fund, which is an opportunity to invest in early stage research ideas. These are sort of high risk, high reward research projects that also promote narratives of hope and possibility, right? So how do we find and fund the creative solutions to addressing these incredibly vexing challenges that we face? So Duke Restore is the idea there is to creatively rebuild habitats and help nature and people. High Seas on Duke is looking to identify sustainable solutions for the emerging blue economy, everything that has to do with our oceans. Oceans and Human Health is about tapping the power of the marine environment for health innovation. So we've got 3 projects that were funded last year under the Dean's Research Venture Fund, and we have 2 new ones that were just funded here in the last couple of weeks. And the 2 new ones, one is dealing with deep geothermal in the Duke Forest. It's the idea there is to drill an exploratory slim hole to basically investigate the feasibility of whether or not, 1, thermal energy is possible in the Duke Forest, and 2, whether or not that might be something that would be helpful to the university as a whole. So super exciting, high risk research there, but we wouldn't be able to do it without this research venture fund. Second one investigates wetlands protection and climate change. The idea there is that as sea level rises, we are seeing wetlands become degraded, and that is probably releasing some stored carbon. We need to understand that process better so we can create better management solutions for it. So these are the 5 projects that are sort of moving forward right now that we are very excited about with the Dean's Research Venture Fund. All right, so with that in mind, I want to turn my attention now to the vision that President Price has articulated across the university that Duke could be what he's calling the climate university, which I find incredibly exciting because it very much aligns with the vision I have for us as a school. And I think it's inspiring to be a dean, a faculty member, a student, a staff person at an institution that has an ambition that large, that grand. So the vision here is to help chart the pathway towards a just, resilient, and net carbon world by 2050. So, and we've been engaged in 2 efforts at the university to move this vision forward. The first is called the Duke Climate Initiative. I hinted at this at the introduction when we were going over the agenda. It's focused on research, but not exclusively so. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. And the second is the Board of Trustees Task Force on Climate and Sustainability. So that was a charter by President Price that focuses on 4 areas: research, education, facilities and operations, and community. How do we engage with our community authentically, legitimately? And so those are the initiatives. So we've got 2 really grand efforts taking place across Duke right now that are looking, how do we become more central to what is happening in the realm of climate change? So let's talk a little bit about the Duke Climate Initiative. So back in April last year, President Price and Provost Kornbluth basically said we need to have a university-wide effort on sort of identifying what our research superpowers are as it relates to climate. So we started working with the deans last April. We worked with them throughout the summer, and then starting in the fall, we convened 3 working groups of more than 50 faculty across the university to help us identify our superpowers. So big questions. What are our existing assets in this area? How do we leverage them? Where are we already serving as a leader in some of these areas? What could we be doing in these areas to move the needle on climate change, to bolster and build our strength, right? So again, we worked in collaboration with the deans, with faculty. When we came back in August and September, we convened these 3 working groups. They got to work in October, and in January, they had their report done for us. So we've been working on a very tight timeline. And these are the general areas that they identified, these working groups identified, that they felt were Duke's superpowers. So I'm going to walk through these very quickly. So there's 3 areas: energy transformation, climate resilience, and climate and data. And then, of course, the 4th block down there is about how do we actually empower the next generation of leaders? What's our educational mission, and how does this dovetail fit into the kind of research we want to do? Because we don't just want research to be over here. I got to figure out what direction I'm going, right over here. We want it to really map onto our teaching mission as well. So let me just start with climate transformation. So academic institutions have an incredibly critical role to play. We're thought leaders. We can lead with our ideas. We can lead with our IP, or we can be IP generators. We are educators. We are mini cities where decarbonization projects can be piloted, basically. So how do we leverage everything that we can do across our mini city here at the university to advance the ideas of decarbonization and energy justice? So those were the twin ideas that came out. If we're going to try to transform our energy footprint on the planet, where can Duke contribute? And those are the 2 areas. When it came to climate resilience, the question was, how is it that Duke can help design and build socially, economically, and ecologically resilient and equitable solutions to climate change? So our coastal habitats and communities was one area where we felt like we had a comparative advantage. Water and livelihoods was another area where we felt like we had a comparative advantage. And natural and engineered climate management. So those are the 3 areas when we think about climate resilience where Duke has a comparative advantage and that we want to continue to push forward in. The 3rd area has to do with climate and data. So climate issues are clearly complex socio-technological problems. They intersect in all sorts of areas. They intersect with equity, they intersect with health, they intersect with energy, they intersect with the environment. And action in these areas requires understanding the evidence or the data, right? And translating those data effectively and accurately. And the challenge is we lack timely responses. We lack data interpretation tools, or just plain raw data for achieving impact. Duke has been really good about, certainly more recently, making big investment, big plays in data analytics and machine learning and Bayesian statistics and in the quantitative initiative, computational science. And we want to build on these efforts because, again, we feel this is an area of key advantage for us. And then finally, that last quadrant, the one down there in the right-hand side, we want to empower and prepare the next generation of leaders, our students, undergraduate, graduate, and professional students, to tackle these challenges. Because again, we know that climate change is going to touch every single facet of what we do, from law to policy to finance to engineering. And it is our responsibility basically to educate our students. So we would be remiss if we're not integrating our research mission into these other areas as well. So I think a good question is, we are going to try to, from a strategic standpoint, let me say, we're going to harness our collective assets. We have numerous assets and existing investments that we have made across the university, if you start to look at them, right? How do we leverage these existing investments and really hone in on how we more sharply define and strategically align them to focus on climate change? So that's sort of what will happen as this initiative moves forward. Likewise, another collective asset that we have is sort of the interdisciplinary DNA that is woven into every single thing that Duke does. We are known internationally for our interdisciplinary practice. And so this is something else that we can build on in the school, across the university. We can make a very compelling case for how we bring all of these threads together as we focus on climate change in these particular areas. And then finally, and I've made mention of this already, is that, we have a campus that is a mini city of 40,000 people who work here day to day. Well, I mean, at least they worked here day to day prior to COVID. We don't have 40,000 people that are working here day to day, but come fall, we certainly hope to be back up and running and humming along at that capacity again. And there are numerous experiments that we can undertake to make ourselves more sustainable, more climate forward in our thinking and doing, in everything that we can possibly, think about. So we've got an incredible place to experiment with our students, with our research projects, in many, many different ways, which I think is a really exciting proposition as a faculty member and as a student. So, this is sort of the idea that President Price has articulated as we start to think about how could Duke become the climate university. And in order to be the climate university, it's going to be a mission that extends across our research, education, facilities and operation, and community missions. So, and I think that's very exciting. So I'm sort of winding down here, and I want to close out by taking some of my own advice, this whole idea of narratives of possibility, and suggest why we should be hopeful right now, especially when it comes to climate change. So this is something I care passionately about in the school. And as I hope you are gathering, the university is taking this very, very seriously. So what I observe, at least right now, is that we are moving away from narratives of skepticism, denial, and underreporting. Like, journalists on the left and the right are finding ways to carry climate change stories that we haven't seen previously. And I think because of that, it's not to say that the issue still isn't politicized, of course it is, but there has been a shift, if you were paying attention. We are also seeing a profound shift or shifts in public perception. This is happening in part because of the change in weather that we're seeing that is also being linked to climate change. And weather is something that everybody can talk about on a day-to-day basis and sort of understand how it's affecting me, and have a conversation with your uncle or your cousin or your aunt about these things. So I find that encouraging. We're seeing these shifts take place. Climate action is also being institutionalized in the United States and globally, certainly in the United States in a new way. So in the US, within hours of taking office, you will recall that President Biden rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement, and then he pledged basically for the United States to be net zero by 2050. And that includes making our power sector emissions free by 2035. So again, some really clear statements right out of the starting gate about how important it is for the United States to be involved. So that has been accompanied by, so we see government, federal government moving, but we've also seen other sectors of the economy taking action, right? Asset managers have pivoted toward carbon neutral strategy. Tech is pursuing green investment and green energy. And in particular, tech is really leveraging their market power with incredibly ambitious climate targets. And they are facilitating and accelerating the transition to green energy with the strategic purchases that they are making to achieve those goals. So they are really moving the markets for us, which is exciting. So it's imperative that the United States continues to send a strong signal and demonstrate action as a leader in these global efforts. Internationally, we're seeing also significant new climate commitments from the industrial economies of climate and South Korea and Japan. The European Union is pushing forward its own Green Deal. Britain is now coal-free, which is a remarkable story. Something that started under the Thatcher government back in the 1980s has now been achieved right now. But it's an amazing story of a transition. Globally, new installations of wind and solar reached record levels in 2020. So there are changes that are happening. Now, there is a lot of hard work ahead. I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's not all rainbows and butterflies and unicorns. Because we have a lot of work ahead. We need to rebuild and repurpose our federal agencies, which really struggled during the previous 4 years. There's a lot of capacity building that needs to happen in our federal agencies to really put forth and demonstrate the ways an efficient and effective government can serve the common good. And I think I want to show this slide to you because I think this is incredibly telling. So this is just a snapshot, a story of what our students are doing post-graduation. Where do our professional students go for graduations? They vote with their feet. And where they voted with their feet last year in terms of the jobs that they chose was the private sector, right? As you will see here, 58% of our graduates are employed in the consulting or private sector overall. That's an increase of 14 percentage points from our 2019 report. Students were not seeing a lot of hope in federal and state government. I think this is now going to start to shift because of the focus that the United States has on climate change again and our chance to kind of rebuild the federal sector, and I think also the knock-on effects that we're seeing in the state sectors. So, in general, last year, students entered jobs with nonprofits, non-governmental organizations, think tanks, research institutes. It was down almost 10% from where it had been before. So students vote with their feet in terms of where they see the opportunities. And I think this is a remarkable statement about where they felt they had the best opportunity to effect change. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see what these numbers look like in the next couple of years as that landscape continues to evolve. I will say that I think when we think about the country, immediate progress is possible in two areas, and that's energy infrastructure and health. And both of those are bipartisan priority areas for us. Anybody who's seen me talk before knows that this is something that I like to talk about. How can we find the issues that stretch across the aisle and build support across the aisle? So policymakers on both sides of the aisle are increasingly recognizing that a cleaner, more reliable, more resilient energy grid creates knock-on possibilities for decarbonizing transportation, manufacturing, and other sectors of our economy, while also preventing the kind of mass outages that we witnessed in Texas just a few weeks back and last summer in California due to wildfires, right? So we're seeing, threats to our energy grid in a lot of different ways. And so this is a place where we can build bipartisan support, I think, going forward with this massive infrastructure bill that's coming down the pike. I think we also have a connection between climate and health. That's another great opportunity for us. So linking climate change action to reduced cardiovascular and respiratory illness, trying to identify how we make a more secure food supply. Those are really middle of the aisle issues, and we can build coalitions from Montana to Manhattan, literally, to help reduce escalating healthcare budgets. So I think those are some really key issue areas that are just win-win-wins for us all the way around. So in closing, if you've got questions, I would love to hear them. My vision for the school, I'm going to wrap up where I started. My vision for the school is that, I want to see the names of our faculty and our graduates populating the headlines as leaders who have developed, the trailblazing kind of science that's going to change the world, that are innovating in new directions in government policy and regulation, that are changing industry practice, standards, directions, and pioneering as thought leaders and action influencers in the nonprofit world. So we need all of these sectors pulling together, and our graduates are going out to do that kind of work, and we need it now more than ever. So with that, I'm going to stop, Katie O'Grady, and you can send some questions to me. And I'm going to put up the slide just about, we've got, for those of you in our alumni and who are in the Nicholas School, for those of you who are at Duke, we have an amazing thing called the Nicholas Environmental Academy, where we do continuing education. We've got some incredible programming available to you there if you want to check out our webpage and sign up for some of the things that will be coming down the pike on that. So.
Thanks, Toddy. Yes, several questions came in, so I'm just trying to organize my brain. While Bronwyn was saying, while he agrees climate change is critical, where do ecology and conservation fit within this mission? They added, when they left NSOE and joined the WWF, Duke was the #1 school for technical experts working there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think that climate is a very big umbrella, right? So I think when we talk about resilience and climate resilience, that's certainly where I think a lot of the ecology and conservation piece comes in. So we had a retreat last May, almost a year ago, where we all came together. And one of the things, so as you would imagine, our conservation scientists, our ecologists came together, and what they really said is that we know what we need to do. The thing, when it comes to climate change, the question is, how do we actually execute on it? And so part of that is adapting appropriately when to leverage our ecological and conservation mission. So how do we continue to build on some of the basic science that we need to understand the impacts of climate change on critters and habitats? And then what are the key issues, areas of action where we need to take action in that realm? So like I said, climate is a very big umbrella, and there's plenty of space sort of for ecology and conservation. And we are seeing certainly our ecologists and our conservation scientists step up to those challenges. And we are also in the middle of doing a strategic refresh of the curriculum, where, I think rightly so, we pride ourselves on the technological tools, techniques, and capacities that we build with all of our students. And that will continue to be the case. So whether we're dealing, with modeling or drones or GIS or other sort of spatial data issues, we're building out our data analytics component consistent with what you're seeing with data and climate. So those are also the key definitive factors that go into having a Nicholas School degree, and will continue to be absolutely in the forefront.
And she also just mentioned that she's a hiring manager, and so trying to find candidates that can speak the science without, in layman's terms, and make it digestible to everyone is really hard to find. So she's on board with our goal there.
Very good.
Yeah.
And if you have jobs, send them to us. We will be happy to post them for you.
Yes, please. We also have someone, Rob, he works in energy and efficiency and facilities management. And he first mentions that the Duke Energy Company also set a goal for targeting net zero by 2050. So that's a nice lineup that we have that I wasn't aware of. Also was wondering if the Nicholas School has any partnerships or support for the Duke facilities departments or hospital in terms of prioritizing energy efficiency.
Absolutely. Great question. Thank you for the question. So Duke has established its own goal to be carbon neutral by 2024. So we are out in front of just about every other higher education institution in the nation, and we are mostly on target to reach that goal. That's one of the things that President Price's task force on climate and sustainability had been asked to address, and so we are actively looking at that in terms of how we do that. So there has been a lot of discussion here at the university about how do we really become carbon neutral, with our own particular footprint. And of course, that's challenging because we are dependent on Duke Energy supplying us with a certain percentage of power. And so therefore we are dependent on their source of power, right? So we have tried a variety of, we're working on that through a variety of efforts, including a huge solar purchase that we just did last year that is helping us meet our goals. So we are actively working on that. And I think this is another area where Duke is a living laboratory. And this idea of drilling geothermal in Duke Forest is another, again, high risk, high reward sort of opportunity. Will it pay off? Who knows? But, it's how we as a research institution should be pushing the boundaries of what is possible at a university campus.
Thanks, Toddy. Also just got a question from Al, and he said, I believe climate change deniers threaten effective action on many levels. How can we peel off more of those who continue to insist that we do not need to spend money on the issue? And it's
Oh, Katie, you froze up there. So I think I got most of the question. So I'm going to move it forward. And if it comes back, we can put it in the chat, maybe to me directly. So I think the question was about climate deniers and how do we sort of lessen the influence that they have, if I've got it correctly. So, I think that there is a lot of growing shift in public perception as it relates to climate change. At least we certainly were seeing that last year. And as part of that, I think we need to continue to build on what is possible. So this would get back to my idea of narratives of hope and possibility. Where do we have consensus and how can we begin to move things forward in terms of capitalizing on areas where we actually have agreement. So we can see that flooding is becoming more challenging. We can see that wildfires are becoming more challenging. We can see that intensity of weather, whether it's the derechos, whether it's tornadoes, whether it's hurricane season, right, which was historic last year. We can see these changes, and people at the local level are experiencing this successively, which then sort of, I think, contributes to our ability to start to shift the conversation. So I think all of us in the environmental world have a responsibility to engage in these conversations as constructively as possible. And sometimes that means trying to find the right door to enter the conversation with whomever and wherever they're coming into the conversation. So I come from I'm from West Virginia. I come from a very conservative family. And, there are members of my own family that don't believe climate change is real. And I'm the dean of the Nicholas School. So, but I try to still figure out ways to have those conversations. And even if we never mention the word climate change, we can talk about the weather. So it's finding that door that you can walk through to build some sense of common dialogue, empathy, conversation around so that we can at least try to move it forward.
Thanks, Toddy, and sorry for dipping out. That doesn't happen in cocktail parties, just on Zoom. We also have someone who's wondering if the Nicholas School is partnering with anyone locally to help support efforts in the environmental space. Do those relationships span schools across Duke?
Yeah, terrific question. A very important question. Gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit about the community connection. So one of the 4 pillars in what President Price has charged us with in the task force on climate and sustainability involves community, right? So one of those pillars. So in addition to the task force he charged on climate and sustainability, he also charged a task force on Duke in Durham, which is meant to explicitly address the opportunities that we have to be a more authentic partner in our own backyard. So of course, we would want to be building on this as part of the climate initiative. Now in the Nicholas School, we have a couple of different things that we're doing. One of those is building explicit sort of pathways with K through 12, and then also with newly admitted undergraduate students here at Duke, just to make sure that as they come into the Nicholas School, they are feeling a sense of belonging and inclusiveness when they come from our local community, right? So we have a lot of underrepresented minorities, not exclusively so, of course, but one of the things that we know is we want to make sure our Black and Brown students who are coming to join us feel wanted, supported, included in what we are doing. And we know that we have to make some different assumptions about how to be successful when we do that. Also with first gen students, so that we have to be a little bit more explicit when we're thinking about those pathway programs. How do we get more people from the local community into our programs? So that's one thing. Another thing is that we have something called the DEEP Collaborative, where Nikki Cagle, one of our professors, has been working with almost 30 nonprofits in the region to do environmental justice, environmental or climate justice work, and DEI work with those environmental organizations, so that we are sort of in a train the trainer mode here. How do we make sure those organizations in our larger community are getting the education they need? They don't necessarily have the capacity to do that kind of work. We have it, we can share it. And I think that's a good role for us to be playing in our larger community. One of the things that's coming out of the Duke and Durham task force, our sister task force, is the idea of creating an exchange where community members would bring to the exchange projects that they want, and then faculty and students would come to the other portion of the exchange and learn about those projects, so that we are doing a better job of basically matching up with what the community really wants when it comes to the work that they want done. So this exchange would sort of bring those two halves together. Coupled with that, we as a university also need to make sure that we are trained and capable of actually engaging with the community in appropriate ways. Sometimes we come in and think we know all the answers, which is sometimes not really correct. So we have to learn how to listen, how to be a little bit more humble, how to engage, and recognize that book learned expertise is relevant, but so is lived expertise, and to learn from the people who have lived in this community for a very long time, not only here in Durham, but actually down in Beaufort and Carteret County.
Thanks, Toddy. This next question, One Health is a really important issue, especially right now, given COVID-19. Duke could really play a role in this field. Does the Nicholas School fit into the One Health idea at Duke?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so this is a good question. It kind of goes back to the question about conservation and ecology. So Stuart Pimm wrote an incredible article in Science, I want to say 2 or 3 months ago. I don't know if anybody can hunt that down on the web and put the link in there, but it was an incredibly great article, basically making the linkage between disappearing habitats, the increased transmission of zoonotic disease to human populations, and climate change, right? All of those things sort of working together that result in the kinds of transmissions, presumably, that we've seen from COVID-19. Now, of course, that remains an open question. But what he was saying is that when we see things like SARS, when we see things like MERS, and when we see things like COVID, this is in part due to that triple whammy of changing habitats, increasing climate change, animals living closer to humans, humans living closer to animals, and then the ultimate transmission of zoonotic diseases from one population to the other. So yes, absolutely, I think we're doing work in that area. There's work that John Polson is also doing with African elephants in Western Africa, the jungle elephants in Western Africa, basically looking at carbon sequestration, the eradication of those elephant populations, and what happens as a cascading influence. So again, back to the idea of ecology and conservation being central to the notion of understanding climate change, the cascading impact that removing that elephant from the ecosystem has on everything that happens in that entire ecosystem. So imagine if somebody were around at the turn of the 20th century, when wild buffalo populations were being eradicated from the prairies in the United States, and could track the consequences the subsequent cascading consequences of what was happening as the buffalo were removed. That's what John Polson is doing in West Africa in looking at those elephant populations and what happened. And so there are lots of ways I think that our research is contributing to understanding some of those things. We also have partnerships with Duke Global Health Institute, doing some amazing work in South America with mercury poisoning, rising mercury levels related to artisanal mining, among other sorts of things. So the One Health is also a very big bucket where we have a lot to say. The last thing I'll say on that is that Jim Zhang, one of our researchers, doing incredible work in China as it relates to air quality, asthma, and climate change, and what all of those intersections mean for, our lungs are sort of the front line of how our body interacts with a changing climate, given all the different atmospheric changes that come with climate change, whether it's more pollen in the atmosphere, maybe it's more PM2, heat, and other sorts of things. And so he's doing really incredible research on very large population studies in China to understand those changes.
Thanks, Tati. And my brain is thinking of Heather Stapleton as well.
Absolutely.
In her research. I can't get the words.
Sorry. Yeah, no, so Heather's an ecotoxicologist, right?
Thank
so part
you.
of the work, part of the work that she does is looking at, it's not quite center into the climate stuff. It's harder for me to make that linkage. It doesn't mean it's any less important, and it will continue to be incredibly important to our school. I don't want the message to be, you only can do climate change and come to the Nicholas School. That's not true. It's just an area of focus that we want to make sure we're highlighting for societal reasons. The work that she does is around something called exposomics. And so exposomics is looking at the cumulative impact that exposures to environmental contaminants have on our health. And so because of that, basically what we want to do is, we're really good at looking at one impact on a human and, what's the impact of one chemical on a human. But when we think about the cumulative impact, it's more meaningful because there's a lot of, cumulative impact and interactive impacts. And so that's something that she's really pioneering in. And we're really proud of the work that she has done there in her lab and the work that she has got going on.
Thanks, Tati. And I got a question, just curious how the Marine Lab would be tied into these efforts, kind of underneath the Nicholas School umbrella.
Absolutely. So Marine Lab, of course, oceans are a huge, huge part of the climate calculus. We sequester enormous amounts of carbon in the oceans. That has consequences for understanding ocean chemistry. So there's a basic science research, the biogeochemical cycles that take place in the oceans with more carbon being sequestered there, and what the consequences are for all of the, the microbes and everything that live in the oceans. Really important for us to understand. So that's just sort of a basic research question. And then, of course, we have a lot of work going on to understand what is the consequence for all of the critters and habitat that are happening in the oceans as well. So we have folks that are tracking that. Brian Silliman, for instance, one of our professors, is looking at sort of how do we rethink about the restoration economy as it relates to sort of seagrass and oyster reefs as part of an adaptation to climate change. So are there ways that we can begin to think about a more resilient, forward-looking world that is more restorative and deals more effectively with the consequences of sea level rise? So that's something that he's working on. Zachary Johnson, one of our faculty members down at the Marine Lab, is working on a very large DOE project that's looking at how do we take algae grown in the ocean and turn it into a new energy source. I think it's just a fantastic, could also be a food source as well. So it's a really fantastic research project. He's incredible researcher, the work that he has going on down there as well. Lots and lots of ways. Javier Basurto is working on fisheries, understanding impacts on small scale artisanal fishers and the consequences that they have under a changing climate as well.
Thank you, Tati. And a lot of this research, everybody, can be found on our Nicholas School webpage. So if any of these really interests you, please check out the Nicholas School page. We're running short on time, so I have questions just about the school, Toddy, that came in. They were curious how many graduates were kind of average this year, and then how many admitted students we're looking at for next year.
Oh, good questions. So last year, as you will imagine, was an odd one because of COVID. So last year we had probably one of our lowest enrollments that we've had in quite some time. We had around 100, 110 total students come in. We typically have between 155 and 165. Understandably so. I think during COVID times, people were like, do I want to go? Do I want to be in an online environment? What's it going to be like? I think for the students that did come, I think we gave them a really good experience. We had in-person, we had hybrid, and we had fully online classes. We had a big mixture of all of those things. So we have a graduating class this year of, I think this year we have a graduating class probably of 140 some. And so next year we're going to have a smaller class. Just in terms of probably more like 110. Our admitted class right now is really big. I know we got more applications this year. It was a huge year for applications for our professional students. And so right now, April 15th was our deadline, but we extended it to May 15th. Which what we typically do every year. And so we're waiting to see how things kind of shake out. So we are anticipating probably between, and I know this is a very large uncertainty sort of boundary, but probably between 150 to 220 students is sort of where we've estimated it. Again, it's another weird year. Every place has gotten more applications. We don't know what that's going to mean in terms of students saying yes to us or saying yes to other places. So we're just kind of holding on to see what the total numbers are, and then we will adjust as appropriate in terms of expanding the number of sections we need to accommodate the students or not. But we're waiting. We will know more. Our numbers will be more bomb-proof by mid-May. I'll tell you that environmental or ecosystem and conservation science continues to be at the top in terms of the areas that attract our students: coastal environmental management and business in the environment, and economics and environmental policy. Those tend to be our largest concentrations, which is not to say that the other concentrations still don't. They also attract good numbers of students, but we see lots more in those other ones.
Connie, this is Kevin. I'm stepping in because Katie's internet's a little wonky. There's a good way to wind down the evening, so it's really just two quick questions.
Yeah.
What keeps you up at night as dean?
Mm-hmm.
And then what's the best part of being dean?
Oh, those are great questions. What keeps me up at night? I worry about people. When we've got stuff going on with our students, it's been a really, really hard year for mental health, for everybody, right? For faculty, for staff, for students. People had to pivot to work from home. That meant they had to deal with children. They had to deal with elder care. They had to deal with illness. They had to deal with a whole variety of things that was completely unexpected. And everybody had to do that. And so that really took a toll, because we have a lot of high performers at Duke, both in our students and our faculty and our staff. And it's really hard for people to let go of their, oh, I got to hit my deadlines. I got to get this done. I got to, go. We all want to kind of get that silver ring, but this was a year where we all were like, okay, I think everybody has to take a bit of a step back and recognize that we are just not going to be able to do all the things that we could do for a variety of reasons. And that was okay. So I worry about the mental health of our faculty, staff, and students. It's been a very stressful year. As a dean, as a manager, it's hard to figure out what the solutions are to that. Sometimes you just don't have solutions, and you have to be honest. Like, I'm with you. I'm walking this path with you. I've got the same, I've got elder care issues. I've got child issues. I've got the same issues you do, and I'm trying to be dean, and I know it's not easy. And there's not a whole lot we can do about it. We just have to get through it together. So those are the things. It's the people part that keeps me up at night. The best thing about being dean is also the people part. You know, I think about our master's symposium this last week and seeing the incredible research that our students are doing and how they're going to go out and change the world, and it makes it all worth it. It's you know, you put in long hours, you have a lot of issues you have to deal with, and then you see what comes with these students and the work that they're engaged in. And when you engage with alumni, like all of you out there, and I hear the stories of what you're doing, whether it's with WWF, whether it's with the federal government or the EPA or NOAA, or whether it's with an amazing company, a startup, or some, you know, large organization. Like I got to interview the CEO of McDonald's last night as one of the alumni events, and learn about everything that they are doing to change the world, right? There's so many people, you know, who really can make a difference out there, every single one of us. And, you know, I feel like I've got a frontline seat to shaping what we can be, to motivating what we can be, and then to witnessing what has been, you know, we have 7,000 graduates out of the Nicholas School out there, an army, a literal army of people out there trying to change the world. And I find that really empowering.
Okay, well, that's I think a very, very perfect note to end on this evening. I want to thank Dean Steelman for her time, and I also want to thank the alumni for joining us, be it at the Nicholas School or other areas of Duke. We're very grateful for you spending your Friday evening with us. For those of you who want to continue your journey with the Nicholas School, please note that the Environmental Academy webpage is on the Nicholas School website. Please take a look at that when you can. And for those of you who are joining us in some of our other events this evening, we look forward to seeing you there. And we're looking forward to seeing everyone again back on campus in the very near future. So thank you. Happy reunions to you all. Go Duke. And thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks, everybody.